Everyone assumed Scottish Americans would be genetically identical to their ancestral clans. But when scientists actually tested their DNA, what they found was 0 genetic matches, not a single one. The ancient Highland bloodlines had completely vanished. To understand why, we need to go back 300 years. In the mid-1700s, the Scottish Highlands were emptying. The Highland clearances, a brutal campaign of forced eviction, drove tens of thousands of Gaelic-speaking clanspeople off ancestral lands. Landlords wanted sheep. They got them. And the people who lived on those hills for centuries boarded ships for America. They carried almost nothing with them across the ocean, but they carried their names: MacDonald, Campbell, MacLeod, Fraser, Stewart, names that echoed through the Highland glens for generations, passed down across an ocean and through 300 years. Today, more than 5 million Americans proudly claim Scottish ancestry. Tens of thousands attend Highland Games every single year, from Grandfather Mountain in North Carolina to the Scottish Festival in Costa Mesa, California. Clan societies flourish in every state. Tartan registries carefully preserve ancient family patterns. Genealogical charts trace lineages all the way back to specific Highland chiefs. The assumption, deeply held, rarely questioned, is that these Americans carry the same blood as the clans they celebrate. That somewhere in their DNA, the genetic signature of a Highland warrior persists. And then, commercial DNA testing arrived. Companies like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe promised to connect people with their roots. Millions of Scottish Americans submitted saliva samples. They expected confirmation, a genetic mirror of their clan heritage, a biological receipt for what their surnames already told them. What they got was something else entirely. When researchers finally conducted a rigorous genetic comparison, not a commercial product, an actual scientific analysis, the results defied every expectation. The genetic evidence showed a divergence so complete, so thorough, that it forced scientists into a fundamental rethinking of what Scottish American identity actually means at the molecular level. Then, researchers ran the actual genetic comparison. The study parameters were precise. Scientists collected Y-chromosome and autosomal DNA from hundreds of self-identified Scottish Americans across the United States, individuals with documented Scottish surnames and family oral histories. Many held membership in clan societies. They were exactly the population you would expect to carry Highland genetic signatures. The comparison dataset came from modern Scotland itself. Haplogroup reference profiles drawn from men bearing the same clan surnames in the Highlands and Islands. These Scottish samples represented the closest living genetic proxy for the historical clan populations. If Scottish American DNA had preserved its clan origins, the match should have been straightforward. Y-chromosome haplogroups should have aligned. Autosomal markers should have overlapped significantly. The genetic distance should have been small. It was not small. It was enormous. The first results showed massive, unexpected divergence. Not a partial mismatch, not a slight statistical drift. A complete absence of clan-specific genetic signatures in the Scottish American sample. The specific Y-chromosome haplogroups that define individual Highland clans, the subclades of R1b and I1 that mark MacDonald from Campbell, MacLeod from Fraser, functionally absent in their American counterparts. Men named MacDonald in Tennessee carried DNA that bore no genetic resemblance whatsoever to men named MacDonald in Skye. The magnitude was staggering. Researchers expected some drift. 300 years of separation guarantees a degree of genetic distance. But the complete erasure of clan-specific markers pointed to something far more profound than simple generational drift. Something had fundamentally rewritten the Scottish American genome. But the reason why goes far deeper than anyone assumed. The first layer of explanation is deceptively simple. The Scottish emigration to America was never what the popular narrative claims. The clearances did push Highlanders across the Atlantic, but they were not the majority, not even close. The largest wave of Scottish emigration came from the lowlands. Genetically, the lowlands and the Highlands were different countries. Lowland Scots carried a different genetic profile, heavier in Anglo-Saxon and Scandinavian markers, shaped by centuries of Northern English integration. They did not carry clan haplogroups, they never had. Lowland Scots arrived in America bearing Scottish surnames and Scottish accents, but they brought lowland DNA with them, and that DNA had no clan signature whatsoever to preserve. But the Lowlanders were only part of the story. The largest group of Scottish emigrants were actually the Ulster Scots, known in America as the Scotch-Irish. Their genetic heritage was already a composite before they ever reached American shores. The Ulster plantation of the early 1600s transplanted Scottish and English settlers into Northern Ireland. These settlers, predominantly Lowland Scots and Northern English, spent 5 to 7 generations in Ulster before crossing to America. During those generations in Ireland, they absorbed significant genetic material from the native Irish population around them. By the time the Scotch-Irish boarded ships for Philadelphia, Charleston, and Appalachia, their DNA was already a blend: Scottish, English, Irish, possibly Norse. Surnames and culture stayed Scottish, but the genetics were rewritten by generations in Ulster, and one migration bottleneck rewrote their DNA entirely. Here is where the founder effect enters the picture, and this is critical. When a small group breaks away from a larger population, genetic diversity is dramatically reduced. Whatever alleles the founders carry become overrepresented in every subsequent generation. Whatever alleles they lack vanish permanently. The Scotch-Irish migration to Appalachia was exactly this kind of bottleneck. Small families moved into isolated mountain valleys. They married within tight communities. The founding populations were often measured in dozens of families, not thousands. Whatever composite DNA those founders carried, Lowland Scottish, Northern English, Irish markers, became the genetic bedrock of entire regions. Highland clan DNA was not present in those founders. It could not be inherited because it was never there. The clan surnames persisted. The genetic signatures did not. A Campbell in the Blue Ridge inherited a name, nothing more. His DNA came from a far more complex and tangled set of ancestors than any clan genealogy could ever capture. And then the frontier did what frontiers do. These Scottish-American communities intermarried with English settlers, with German Palatines, with Dutch colonists, with Huguenot refugees. Each generation diluted whatever residual Scottish markers remained and introduced new genetic material from across Northern Europe. Within just a few generations, Scottish-American DNA became indistinguishable from the broader colonial population. Then, scientists found a genetic marker nobody expected. When researchers examined the Y-chromosome haplogroups of Scottish Americans in detail, the dominant signatures were not Scottish at all. They were Germanic, subclades of R1b commonly associated with the Rhineland and the Low Countries, appearing at frequencies far higher than in modern Scotland itself. This was the genetic fingerprint of German and Dutch colonial settlers, whose DNA had been absorbed into Scottish-American lineages through centuries of intermarriage. The autosomal data revealed something even more surprising. Scandinavian markers appeared in Scottish-American samples at levels exceeding those found in modern Scotland itself. This seems paradoxical, until you consider the migration patterns. Norse-descended populations settled heavily in the same American regions where Scotch-Irish communities had established themselves, and the resulting genetic blending across those populations was inevitable. And then there were haplogroups no one anticipated. Researchers detected non-European markers in Scottish-American samples at statistically significant frequencies. These markers pointed to admixture events that no family oral history acknowledged and no clan genealogy had ever recorded. The hidden genetic history of colonial America, mixing across every population boundary, had left its signature in the DNA. What modern DNA tests really reveal is striking. Scottish Americans are not a preserved genetic fragment of Highland Scotland. They are a pan-Northern European genetic composite, shaped by Lowland Scottish, English, Irish, German, Dutch, Scandinavian, and additional ancestries. Compressed and recombined through 3 centuries of colonial and post-colonial life, their genetic profile exists nowhere else on Earth, and it bears no resemblance to the clan populations they claim descent from. But here's where it gets interesting. Scotland changed too. Its DNA is not what it was 300 years ago, and most analyses miss this. While Scottish Americans were blending with the colonial melting pot, Scotland itself was undergoing its own profound genetic transformation. The Norse Viking presence in Scotland was not a footnote. It was a fundamental reshaping event that redefined entire bloodlines. Norse settlers colonized the Hebrides, the Northern Isles, and the mainland coast. They did not merely raid and retreat. They stayed. They married local women. They fathered children, who became the next generation of so-called clan members. The Norse Gael legacy is embedded deeply in Highland DNA. And when geneticists examine modern clan members in Scotland today, what they find is a population heavily marked by Scandinavian admixture. A MacDonald in Skye carries substantial Norse markers. A MacLeod in Lewis may carry more Norwegian DNA than Gaelic. What scientists found was striking about these bloodlines. The very clans used as the reference for Scottish ancestry are themselves a product of extensive genetic mixing. And it did not stop with the Norse. Centuries of continued immigration reshaped Scotland's gene pool even further. Irish migration during the industrial era, English settlement across the lowlands, post-colonial arrivals from South Asia and the Caribbean. Modern Scotland is a genetically diverse nation that bears its own complex relationship to its ancient clan past. The result is a double divergence. Scottish Americans drifted away from the historical clan baseline in one clear direction. They moved toward a colonial Northern European composite, a broad blend shaped by centuries of settlement in America. Meanwhile, modern Scots drifted from that same baseline in the opposite direction, toward a Norse-influenced, increasingly cosmopolitan population. Neither group preserved the original clan genetic signature. It persists now only as a theoretical reconstruction, a faint echo. The two populations that claim the same heritage have diverged so completely that they are now, genetically, strangers. So, what does Scottish American DNA actually look like in the modern era? The answer is clear and striking. DNA reveals that Scottish Americans now constitute a distinct new genetic population. Not Scottish, not English, not Irish, not German. They are a unique composite that emerged from 300 years of colonial blending within the American environment. Their Y-chromosome profiles cluster with broad Northern European populations rather than with any specific national or ethnic group. Their autosomal DNA shows contributions from at least 5 major European source populations, blended in a unique ratio. Those proportions exist in no other diaspora community anywhere on Earth. This is a population without genetic precedent. No matching clan haplogroup profile can be found anywhere. Not in Scotland, not in Ireland, not in Scandinavia, not in Germany. The Scottish-American genetic signature is its own thing entirely, a new creation of the colonial period. It was born from the specific circumstances of migration, bottleneck, isolation, and intermarriage that define the American frontier. The data is clear. Bloodlines tell a completely different story than the surnames, tartans, and clan registries suggest. What scientists found was this. clan identity, as it exists among Scottish Americans today, is entirely cultural and historical. It is meaningful in every way that human meaning operates. But it is not biological. The DNA disagrees. 3 centuries of hidden genetic history have severed the molecular link between Scottish Americans and the clans they honor. And this changes how we should read every DNA test. Commercial testing has reinforced the very mythology science disproves. When a DNA testing company reports that a customer is 32% Scottish, what does that actually mean? It means that 32% of their autosomal markers match a modern reference population currently living in Scotland. A reference population that is itself a product of centuries of genetic mixing. And the result is entirely circular. You are being compared to a population that is not the same population your ancestors actually came from. You are being matched against a modern genetic composite and simply told that it represents your ancient heritage. This is not a flaw limited to Scottish ancestry alone. It applies across every single diaspora population worldwide. Genetic identity and cultural identity diverge sharply wherever migration has occurred. The Irish-American genome does not match modern Ireland. Italian-American DNA does not align with modern Italian profiles. The gap between believed ancestry and actual DNA is universal. Heritage is a narrative construction, built from names, stories, traditions, recipes, songs, and memories passed down through generations. It is real, it matters, but it is not a nucleotide sequence. DNA reveals what actually happened in our past. Every marriage, every migration, every encounter that history forgot. What actually happened is always more complex than the story. Scottish Americans carry a hidden genetic history, one that speaks to the full, unedited reality of colonial American life. A reality of constant movement, constant mixing, constant reinvention. Their DNA is not a record of clan purity. It is a record of human complexity, a far more remarkable inheritance than any single clan lineage could ever be. But Scottish Americans are not the only ones with hidden DNA secrets. Every diaspora carries its own concealed genetic story. Want to know what your DNA really reveals about your ancestry? Subscribe. We uncover one genetic mystery every week. The next video examines another diaspora population whose DNA tells a story completely at odds with their cultural identity. You will not want to miss what the genetic evidence shows. The data is